Are there any questions? You're all so brilliant. Hello. Do you have any questions?
Just could you clarify the issue about special ed students?
Actually, I'm not as good at doing that as Kim is. Kim, would you come up and clarify whatever question you have? I know the big picture, but
I remember it would be helpful to put this
yeah. It is very confusing, by the way.
You're saying you clarify how they're categorized?
Right, I just want to make sure that I understood it correctly, that the special ed students were in a separate category that were not being counted or were being counted for dropouts.
So basically, and Jen, you can help me with this. But basically, for purposes of accounting for the graduation rates and discharge rates, the Department of Ed divides the students into two camps. One that they call general education and one that's self-contained, students in self-contained special education classes plus District 75 students. So it's a little tricky with special ed because some students who have special education needs are counted in the general education category, and but the students who are sort of in need of the most intensive services have their own category. So there's two categories, and what we see is for the students in the more intensive category, we see a higher rate of push-out, which is disturbing, almost 25%.
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think that this graph is also instructive in showing how not including those students in the overall graduation rate actually inflates our perceptions of how schools are doing in general. So the official graduation rate is 62%, but it would be 4 percentage points lower, or 58%, if all students in New York City were included in that rate. So this provides some insight into how splitting these two rates actually inflates our perceptions of how well our kids are doing.
Just one question: Is it wrong to the perception that although the push-outs rate is going up, that the graduation trend is also trending up?
Yeah,
What's the relationship between
one of the
those?
things that we looked at, and if you want more details, certainly we can give them to you. Yes, the graduation rate is going up, but it's a question of how much and why. And what we talked about earlier was if you look at the number of discharges, and that rate has gone up, the discharge rate, it goes up at the same time the graduation rate goes up. So how many in that discharge rate are actual push-outs? Push-outs are illegal. It's when kids are counseled, I'm just using that quite loosely, that word, to leave school. And one of the trends that is really disturbing is that they are being counseled to leave school in the 9th grade. So you have to look at the graduation rates. You have to understand what that graduation rate really means. And I think what Jennifer should really explain is how that rate needs to be codified. I don't really know how to explain it without confusing.
I think that your question is maybe best answered by looking at this line. So if you want to include discharges, this is the worst case scenario, right? So it's still an increase. There's definitely still an increase over this time period, and I think everyone should be aware of that. The question is whether or not the slope of that line is like this, or whether the slope of that line is like this. And so basically, for example, you see a 4 percentage point increase for the class of 2005. When you adjust for this, you see either a 1, or if you count GEDs, a 2 percentage point increase, right? So there appears to be twice as much progress when you don't include discharges in the calculation.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry if I missed this already, but reasons for the high number of Hispanic and African American males that are included in the push-out list.
I mean, so we don't have our data disaggregated race by gender, so we have an African American discharge rate, and we also have a male-female discharge rate. We would love to have those data as well, but I mean, the reasons why the African American and Hispanic rates could be higher, I mean, certainly there is more mobility among those populations, so just a priori you would expect a slightly higher rate, but obviously those students have historically been served poorly by our schools, and I think that that's a place that we need to look for answers.
Okay. Kim, I know we've covered this, but what are the prospects for the push-outs in particular right now as it stands? What are you able to do for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all saying that we really believe that the priority is to get educational options in place for these students. Because we want them not to be pushed out in the first place, and then we want students who are being pushed out to be able to get back in and to get their education. So there's programs like Diane Morales' program at the door that do GED testing. GED prep and testing for these students, but we also want them to be able to stay in school. The Department of Ed has done some work through the Multiple Pathways program, building educational options for overage, undercredited students who tend to be pushed out, but those programs don't serve nearly enough students. I mean, if you've got almost a quarter of students with special needs, let's say, being pushed out or potentially pushed out of school, you need more programs to serve them.
You know, this just goes a little bit to what I've been talking about a lot in the last couple of years, which is instead of closing the school, shouldn't we put all the resources into fixing the problem in that school? For example, if you have a cohort of kids in a school who aren't doing very well and so bringing down the scores, if you will, of that school, instead of closing the school and reorganizing and putting a whole lot of new schools in that school, why not flood the school with resources that will help those kids, the ones that Ken is talking about, that we're talking about, do better. Put special concentrations on those kids that are not doing well to keep them in school. By the way, the Department of Education, I think in 2003, as a result, I believe, of our report, did a publicity campaign talking to kids in the subway saying, you can stay in school till 21 and you should stay in school, and kind of urging kids to come back. So I think that's a good place to start. Let's go back there and I think throw the resources at those schools that are having trouble.
Also, we should emphasize, just one of the reasons I came back up here, just to emphasize that we don't know that all these kids are push-outs, right? These are kids who were discharged, and the big question is that we need to see disaggregated data to show where these kids went and why they left. I mean, some of them may have left, Jen made very clear, to move or something legitimate, but we have reason to believe that not all of them moved. You know, that some of them.
And that's why I've asked the state controller to do an audit.
The Ernst & Young data then is insufficient, that the DOE says is?
Yeah, do you want to comment?
I mean, I think that we would feel more comfortable if there was an independent, governmental body audit of these data. One of the kind of inside jokes we've been saying is, Enron had an auditor too that it hired, right? And I'm not trying to draw a parallel there, but I'm not sure that private auditing companies serve the same function that government agencies do in actually providing an independent assessment of, do these kids actually enroll at the schools where they're discharged to? It's not enough just to have the codes. We need to know that they got there and that they're still enrolled at those schools. And the state comptroller just found that they're actually not for schools outside of New York City. So he audited 15 schools, and the major error he found was that these kids get transferred and they never show up on the other side. So it's kind of a Hail Mary pass where you say, yeah, they're going, and they never get there.
Anybody else?
Do you have any information about the comptroller's audit that's going to get started? When is that going to happen?
Well, I just spoke to him yesterday, and he agreed to do it, and he wants to get more information from us, and we're sending that to him today. So as was just stated, he did one for schools outside New York City, and so they're sort of already in place, so they can just come right here and do it here.
Why would New York City not include it in that?
Probably because it's such a huge system that I don't know. Maybe no one asked him.